I'm interested in looking at theories of politics and principles in international relations that go beyond just, like we hear, the national interest, that go beyond just um, might makes right, U.S. is the top dog, so we can do whatever we want. Because this, to me, at the end of the day, is not moral. If we can actually talk about universal principles, and that's actually what was carved out at the end of World War II with Nuremberg and the whole kind of framework of international law that developed out of that. And in the past, the U.S. has appealed to these principles to make their cases on the international stage. As much as it might be a pretext, at least there was the intent to cloak what they were doing in norms of democracy and human rights, liberal values, etc. So it piqued my curiosity recently when I heard Senator Rand Paul questioning Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, because Rand Paul was echoing something that I had actually heard Dave Smith say. And then hearing it that second time, it really stuck in my mind, and I thought, well, there might be something here that's very useful. Basically, the idea is this. Comedian and commentator Dave Smith, as well as Rand Paul, they were saying that the United States is at war on these different fronts, including Venezuela. They're making the case that we are actually at war with Venezuela, at war with Iran. So when we talk about U.S. domestic politics and the effect that these wars have on U.S. domestic politics, we have to recognize that now the U.S. is at war on a bunch of different fronts. And the response from Dinesh D'Souza in his debate with Dave Smith, and the response of Marco Rubio responding to Rand Paul was, no, we're not at war because we just went into Venezuela, we took out the president, I would say we kidnapped him, but I'm articulating what is the conventional wisdom here. They said we went into Venezuela, we did a quick operation, we got in and got out. So you can't really call what we did in Venezuela a war. And the point that Dave Smith was making, and that now Rand Paul has been making, is that from Venezuela's perspective, it absolutely is a war. What would happen if, I don't know how many people were killed in the operation. I think it was at least a few hundred, it might have been more. But if another country had done what the United States did to Venezuela, went in, bombed infrastructure, there was a lot of death, kidnapped the president, they kidnapped Trump and took him out, put him on trial, the United States definitely would consider themselves at war, even months later. And the fact that so from the Venezuelan perspective, the United States operation was a declaration of war against Venezuela. You can see how, from the Venezuelan perspective, it absolutely is the United States declaring war on Venezuela. Even though, from the United States perspective, we tend to forget about these things one day to the next. From Venezuela's perspective, it absolutely is a war. Just like if any country had have done this, something similar to the United States. And you know, the United States, we've had disputes about elections. We've had large parts of the population that have been calling for elections to be overturned, on the left and the right. I worked very hard with the 2004 election. It was very close to it. And then it was an election being stolen from Democrats. Um, so just because there's a dispute about an election or who's in control or if there's a regime in control, I've made that argument that there's actually a regime in control and that the presidents are figureheads, um, identified it as COG, continuity of government, but however bad things get in the United States in terms of disputes about elections, disputes about who's in control of the government, disputes about that cause protests. No, I don't think that any American would say that it was legitimate. It was for China or Russia to come and do the kinds of things that the United States does to other countries and did to Venezuela. And we would consider it a declaration of war, the kind of action that the United States did in Venezuela. We would consider it an act of war. Even if there wasn't a declared war, we say it's a de facto, we're at war. Can't do that. So it actually is very appropriate to speak of the United States as being at war. And we wouldn't consider it over in 6 months. We would say, no, the United States is at war if anybody came and did that. So from Venezuela's perspective, the United States is at war with Venezuela. The response by both Dinesh D'Souza and Senator Marco Rubio when these people made that point was the United States gets to define what it means when we're at war because we're the top dog. Okay. Notice that there's a kind of social Darwinism, a kind of moral relativism, and you can make anything legitimate that way just by saying that might makes right. And there's the appeal to the national interest, as if we have to do things that are in the national interest. Well, I don't like that. I think that we should do things that are moral. And if the United States wants to be a leader in terms of liberal values and democracy promotion, nation building, which is what they've claimed all along, then they need to appeal to international norms. And what you're seeing is a stripping away, where now they say the quiet part aloud. And what is the national interest? Is the national interest to have a stable world? I think so. Or is the national interest to maintain the United States' position of hegemony and dominance by balkanizing and fragmenting all these regions of the world? Even if foreign policy blunders don't seem to make a lot of sense, like maybe we lose the war, it's perceived we lost the war in Afghanistan, perceived we lost the war in Vietnam. Did we really? If the goal wasn't, maybe the goal wasn't to set up Western-friendly governments and U.S. puppet regimes. What if the goal in those cases and many foreign policy adventures, what if the goal was actually to fragment the countries, to make the war so costly that even when the U.S. withdrew Vietnam, Afghanistan, those countries would remain economic basket cases for decades and therefore not be able to have a kind of regional integration. The war in Vietnam was also part of the war in Laos, the war in Cambodia, to prevent the good example, the bad apple theory. I just get my computer, I hate it when I do that. The bad apple theory, it's like, or the domino theory, I'm mixing my metaphors. The domino theory is certainly the domino theory of not communism spreading from one place to another, but actually the good example spreading from one place to another, like Latin America. They could see, oh, wow, Nicaragua, they're actually building infrastructure, they're giving health care. They're actually doing a good job with democracy, and we better squash that, or else neighboring Honduras and El Salvador might get ideas about the self-determination, about participating in the political process. We can't have that. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of confusion about the real goals of American foreign policy. It makes sense if you see the goals as actually balkanization, fragmentation, um, keeping any kind of regional alliances from emerging that might counter the U.S. hegemony in the region. Though it doesn't work. Look what's happening with the Middle East right now with Iran. The U.S. has totally overshot their wad. We're facing economic catastrophe through these straits being closed. And it's happening worldwide. Now there's a Russian blockade on the Black Sea, on the port, the Ukraine's only port. The United States has effectively had a blockade of the Caribbean in place since January, shooting at ships. So, and all the Trump tariffs, it's fragmented the world economy. The prices are going up worldwide. They just raised the price of gasoline here in Ecuador, where I live. All the prices went up. So instead of embracing multipolarity and the new way the world's going, with decentralization of power and various poles of power, the United States is desperate to take the entire world down with it, and it's very dangerous. And it might be a bridge too far. And when empires come to an end, it's pretty ugly. And we're starting to see the beginning stages of this.